Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 8 of The Runaway Girls by Jacqueline Wilson, continuing from chapter 14. I had to make a plan. My head ached with all kinds of outlandish and impossible ideas. I even wondered if Kitty's chamber pot might have to be used. But in the end it was simple. Mrs. Chubb thought I was sweet and innocent. She trusted me utterly. When the Chubbs came back indoors, I'd washed up all the dishes and made the kitchen spick and span. I solemnly handed the key back to Mrs. Chubb. Kitty ate up all her supper this time, and she said she was very, very sorry for being so naughty, I said. She's wondering if she could possibly have another jam tart. She liked it so much. For goodness sake, said Mrs. Chubb, she's in disgrace. You don't punish a child by giving her another treat. I reckon the little kiddie has been punished enough for one day, said Mr. Chubb. He lowered his voice, and we might as well make a bit of a fuss of her if you know what. I knew what, but I kept my face smooth and bland. Then, may I go and let her out, please, dear Mr. Chubb? I begged softly. You're an artful little miss, you are, he said, chuckling. He looked at his wife. Let's let young Kitty have a bit of freedom now. Oh, very well, said Mrs. Chubb, but if she starts any nonsense, she'll get locked up again. It won't be in the bedroom this time, it'll be in the coal hole. I hoped she was joking, but I couldn't trust her now. She gave me the key, and I ran upstairs, 2 at a time. Have you got another jam tart? Kitty asked hopefully. You might get one if you mind your manners, I said. Oh, Kitty, I heard them talking. Mr. and Mrs. Chubb. They think you're a gypsy child because you cursed Mrs. Chubb in funny language. That's comic, said Kitty. I was just making up the words to make it sound more scary. It's not comic at all. They're going to take you off to a gypsy camp and leave you there. The gypsies in my storybooks were always stealing children and doing very bad things. I thought Kitty would be horrified, but she was actually smiling. I like gypsies, she said. Gaffer had a lot of gypsy friends. We travelled with them once. I love their bonfire stew. You'd like it too, Lucy. And they have horses, so you could ride them instead of that old nag Nelson. Nelson's not an old nag, and I'm not being taken to the gypsies. They want me to stay here and be their little girl, I said, anguished. Isn't that what you want? Kitty asked sharply. No, not without you. We have to run away quick. Well, that's what I've been saying all along, said Kitty. She swung her legs out of bed and stood up. There, my ankle hardly hurts at all now. But pretend it does when we go downstairs, and be very meek and sorry, I told her. But I'm not. Act it, you noodle, I said, as she pulled on her beloved acrobat outfit. Then they won't be suspicious, so when we get a chance, we can run for it. I wasn't sure Kitty could control herself, but she surprised me. She hung her head and tried to hide behind me when we went into the living room. What are you doing lurking there? Mrs. Chubb said suspiciously. I'm so ashamed, said Kitty in a tiny voice. She rubbed her eyes and managed to look tearful. I'm very, very sorry for behaving so badly, Mrs. Chubb. Oh, poor little mite, said Mr. Chubb. See, she's sorry now, Mrs. C. Let her have that jam tart now. She's already had one, and there's only one left. We should give it to someone else, said Mrs. Chubb. Well, I reckon the only one of us who hasn't had one is our little Albert, and he ain't got teeth in his head to deal with it, said Mr. Chubb. So I'll have it, seeing as I'm head of this family. He took the remaining tart and acted like he was eating it, but when Mrs. Chubb turned her back to lift Albert out of his drawer, Mr. Chubb pressed it into Kitty's hand. She stuffed it into her mouth and had swallowed it down by the time Mrs. Chubb glanced up. She looked suspicious, but said nothing. Little Albert Angel was wailing miserably and wouldn't settle, even when Mrs. Chubb carried him around the room, patting his back. Oh, Albert, why do you always start fretting now, when I'm longing for a bit of peace and quiet? Mrs. Chubb said wearily, rubbing her cheek against his fluffy head. Perhaps he needs feeding, Mr. Chubb suggested. I fed him half an hour ago. He's full to the brim, said Mrs. Chubb. I'll take him for a little bit. You sit down and have a rest, I offered. Thank you kindly, Lucy, sweetheart, she said. Better take off that beautiful shawl, though, just in case he's sick on it. You wear it for a little while, I said, and I wrapped it around her. Oh my, it's so soft and warm, she said, stroking it with a roughened hand. You can have it if you like, I said. Bless you, dear. I couldn't possibly take your pretty shawl, especially as it was your mother's, said Mrs. Chubb. She handed me little Albert Angel, who cried like a little devil at first, but then his wails slowed and his eyelids drooped. I thought he was nearly asleep, so I tried easing him into his drawer, but he screeched indignantly. I sighed and started walking him again. He's so little, and yet he can really make your arms ache, I said. I'll take him for a bit, Kitty offered. No, let Lucy keep on nursing him, Mrs. Chubb said urgently, as if she thought Kitty might dash the baby's head on the hearthstone. Kitty reddened and I tensed, waiting for an outburst that would surely get her locked up all over again. But she managed to bite her lip and stay silent. Little Albert Angel gradually calmed down and fell so soundly asleep that he didn't murmur when I tucked him up into his makeshift cot. Mrs. Chubb was having a little doze on the sofa, worn out. "I'll just nip to the outhouse," she murmured to Mr. Chubb. I looked at Kitty meaningfully. "I will too," she said quickly. "Well, yes, I'll help you. Your poor ankle isn't any better, is it?" I said, as Kitty gave an exaggerated hobble. I took her arm, and we went out of the living room, through the kitchen and out of the back door. Then we looked at each other, hardly able to believe it was so simple. There was a fence behind the outhouse, but not too high, and I'd learned how to climb now. We were both up and over it in a trice, and then we ran along the alleyway, faster and faster, out into the main road. We didn't stop running until we were many streets away, and then leaned against a wall, gasping for breath. We did it," Kitty spluttered. "And your ankle? You were running really fast," I panted. "Well, no point hanging around, but it's much, much better. And we're free, said Kitty, flinging her arms in the air. "Free as a bird," I said, and whirled around. "But you've had to leave your shawl behind," said Kitty. "I don't mind," I said. I wanted Mrs. Chubb to keep it. She had been so very kind to me after all, and I couldn't help feeling guilty for deceiving her. "Truly," said Kitty. "I know you didn't really want to run away." "I want to be with you most of all," I said. "Oh, bother. I'll tell you another thing we've left behind. The reticule with all our money in it." "We've left it in the bedroom. But I've got the tin," said Kitty, jingling coins in the pockets. "Clever you," I cried, and hugged her. She hugged me back hard. "Clever you," she said. "I couldn't have escaped without you." But we didn't feel quite so clever after we'd wandered around for an hour or more, trying to find a safe place to stay the night. Kitty started limping quite badly. She insisted her ankle didn't hurt at all, though we both knew she needed to rest. We couldn't risk going to the park in case Tommy Magpie led his parents there. We couldn't see a church. We couldn't find any derelict houses anywhere. It was colder than usual, and we shivered in our light clothing, but the only warm places were the alehouses, and we were chased away when we tried to go inside. We ended up taking shelter in a shop doorway, huddled together on the step. "I wish I hadn't left that shawl behind now," I said. "I could have spread it over both of us." "I'm sure you're wishing you'd left yourself behind too," said Kitty mournfully. I was partly wishing that, but I denied it vehemently. "I don't even like Mrs. Chubb any more, even though she made such a fuss of me," I insisted. "Mr. Chubb wasn't so bad," said Kitty. "We'll have to get right away from this district tomorrow. We don't want him driving past on his hackney cab and spotting us." "Where can we go?" I asked, and then I suddenly remembered my former plan. "Mr. Chubb won't see us because we won't be anywhere near here. We'll be at a palace, in a great big park," I said. "And you'll be Princess Lucy, and I'll be Princess Kitty," she said. "Go on with the story then." "It isn't a story," I said. "I'm being serious. We're going to the Great Exhibition." "What's that?" Kitty asked. "It's a special show, just opened in Hyde Park. They built a crystal palace, full of wondrous treasures. My governess told me all about it. Thousands of people go there every day. I'm sure they have to queue to get in. I think they might appreciate a little entertainment, like a girl singing and another girl tumbling." "Oh, Lucy," Kitty exclaimed, hugging me tightly. "Anyone would think you were born for this kind of life." It somehow didn't seem so cold anymore. Even the stone steps seemed softer. We curled up together and started to discuss our performance, but were both asleep in moments. I woke at dawn, with a stiff neck and aching back, but I was still excited by my plan. The sky was glowing rosy pink with the sunrise, and it seemed like a good omen. Kitty felt me stirring and stood up and stretched, wincing a little. "How's your ankle?" I asked anxiously. "It's completely better," she said, probably lying. "And your wrist?" "As good as new," she said, flapping her hand. "Come on then, Lucy, let's get some breakfast and be on our way. We have to find somewhere quiet to practice our routine. Perhaps it needs to be a little longer to make a good impression at such a grand venue. We'd better make up several more verses." She was acting as if she wrote the verses and had planned the whole enterprise, but I was just happy she was in good spirits again. We found a bakehouse a few streets away, where the woman let us sit inside the warm and share a small loaf, still hot from the oven, washed down with a mug of milk with a dash of coffee in it. She even let us use her own outhouse. Kitty tried to pay her a little extra for her kindness, but she wouldn't take even a penny tip. "You keep your money, dears. It would be a hard-hearted soul to try to make a profit from two little girls." "Where are you off to so early?" she asked. "We're going to the Great Exhibition," I said proudly, though Kitty frowned at me. "Oh my," said the kindly lady. "How exciting. I hear they've got a dime in there as big as a fist." "We want to see the elephant," I said. The lady chuckled. "Then I'd better give you a bun to feed him," she said, and she popped 2 into a paper bag and gave it to me. I thanked her very much, and Kitty did too, determined to show that she could have good manners when she wanted, but she shook her head at me outside the shop. "You shouldn't have told her where we're going. What if Mr. Chubb comes in here for a loaf of bread?" she remonstrated. "Oh, for goodness sake, Kitty. He lives miles and miles away, and I'm sure he won't come driving his cab around here," I said. "It's still a risk," Kitty insisted. "And what were you doing, making up such stories about elephants?" "There truly is an elephant there. I know all about it," I said. "Can you ride on it?" Kitty asked. "It's not a real live elephant. It's a stuffed one," I said. "So why did she give you the buns for it?" "It was a joke, because she wanted to be kind to us," I said. "Should we save them or eat them up now?" "Better save them," said Kitty, which was sensible because we were still a very long way from Hyde Park. She never once complained about her ankle, but she was limping again, and her lips were pressed tightly together with the effort to keep going. "I think we should take an omnibus," I said. "We're better dressed now." "Do you think it's very expensive?" Kitty asked, jingling the coins in her pockets. The driver only charged 2pence each, which seemed a considerable bargain. We sat up on top and watched the world go by, munching our sugar buns. After quite a while the streets grew very congested, and by the time we got to the West End, the bus was crawling. "Everyone out at Piccadilly Circus," the driver shouted. "We can't go on no further. All the thoroughfares are blocked with folk going to the exhibition. Out you get!" Piccadilly Circus was the most extraordinary place. I'd never seen so many people crammed together in my life. There were rich people, the men in top hats and the ladies in crinolines, and poor people in ragged clothes, and lots of ordinary families wearing caps and bonnets and carrying picnic baskets for sustenance on their journey. There were folk talking in Scotch and Welsh and Irish accents, and foreign languages I didn't understand. There were African people in bright robes, and Indian people with turbans, and Chinamen with brocade jackets and pigtails hanging down their backs. Kitty might stand out in most places wearing her crimson velvet, but not now. No one gave her a second glance. We held hands so we wouldn't get lost in the vast crowd. We didn't need to ask the way. The crowd was surging in one direction only. There was an immense department store called Swan and Edgar, decked out in red, white and blue ribbons, with a model waxen family displayed in the window, supposedly going to the Great Exhibition too. It was getting very hot now, and I hoped the family's faces wouldn't start melting in the strong sunlight. It seemed so strange to think that if Ermentrude's face hadn't melted, I wouldn't be here with Kitty, leading this odd, new, exciting life. It was still quite a way along Piccadilly to Hyde Park, and we had to go at a snail's pace in the jostling crowd, but everyone was in a happy mood, laughing and calling, some even singing merry songs. There weren't just people on the pavement and spread out all over the wide thoroughfare. Office folk hung out of the windows in the buildings above, some clerks boldly sitting on the windowsills themselves, waving Union Jacks. Ragged boys shinned up lampposts for a better view, and there was a huge banner strung over us proclaiming, "Peace and goodwill to all the world, God save the Queen and Prince Albert." When we got to the park gates at last, we still couldn't catch so much as a glimpse of the Crystal Palace, even though we scrambled up onto tables and chairs for a proper view of it. We seemed in the midst of a vast feast. There were big trucks selling baskets of gingerbread and lardy cake, and sweets galore and ginger beer, while women carried great baskets piled high with oranges. One tumbled off into the grass, and Kitty grabbed it quickly and put it in her pocket. There were men with trays selling silver medals of the Crystal Palace. I badly wanted one because they were only 6pence each, but Kitty took one look and said they were just cheap tin and not worth it. We fought our way forward, most folk towering above us, every now and then conscious of a strange dazzle ahead of us, like the strongest sunlight reflecting on water, and then we suddenly had a clear view through the tall elm trees. We clutched hands, overwhelmed. There was the vast glass palace, a great rainbow gleam, wide enough to house 10,000 princesses and all the elephants in Africa. As we got nearer, the colours settled to blue and yellow and red, with a multitude of flags flying from the glass rooftop, and a vast queue scarcely moving, all desperate to get inside the wondrous palace. Many wily folk had had the same idea as me. There were singers carolling anything from opera to bawdy ditties, flautists and violinists, and hurdy-gurdy men with chattering monkeys, dancers and acrobats and strongmen, and simple beggars, some blind, some with missing limbs, some so small they only came up to my waist. They all had purses or caps, half full of pennies. Oh, Kitty, just look. How will we ever get the attention that we need when we have so many rivals? I asked. "We have a unique act," said Kitty, "and we're little children. The crowds will love us. Now, we have to work out the best vantage point. Perhaps we ought not to do our act too close to the palace itself. Folk will be so keen to get in, they won't want to be distracted. Should we try that little space over there, between that man with the big drum and the juggler? They are both so big, they will make us look even smaller." "Yes, I see what you mean. But if we get much nearer, then we'll be able to peer through the glass walls, and maybe, just maybe, we'll see the elephant," I said. Kitty sighed, but she let us be swept along by the crowds, and as we got nearer and nearer the Crystal Palace, she couldn't help getting excited too. It was impossible to get the view I wanted with so many other people blocking our way. We were all being channeled forwards towards the main entrance, with families pushing the way and that, determined to pay their shillings and get inside. "Do you think that children might possibly be half price?" I asked Kitty. "Couldn't we just have a little look at the exhibition before we think about performing?" "We're here to make money, not to spend it," Kitty said sternly. "Oh," I said. I couldn't say anything else. I wanted to see the elephant so much. "Oh, Lucy, don't look like that. I'm sorry to be so fierce. My goodness, if it wasn't for you, I could still be locked up in that wretched bedroom. All right, we will have a look around the exhibition first. I'll be able to tell Gaffer about it when I next see him." I didn't see how she could possibly do that if he was dead and buried, as I suspected, but I couldn't press her further because I could see she was near tears. She cheered up enormously, however, when we tagged into a large family with 6 children in their wake, like little ducklings. We got whisked past the pay booths with them and entered the exhibition without paying a penny. The palace was even more impressive inside. The sun poured through the shining glass and made pools of light on the pale wooden floor. There was greenery everywhere, as if the park outside had crept in with us. Real trees reached right up to the arch of the transept, and water spurted from the immense glass fountain. White marble statues, twice life-size, peered down upon the crowds below, unabashed by their own nakedness. I asked an attendant if there was a gallery especially for animals, and he directed us to the eastern nave. We saw 2 huge Arabian horses rearing up on their white marble legs, and a great Bavarian lion, so realistic that we backed away rapidly, scared it would pounce on us. But where was the wondrous stuffed elephant? We wandered through gallery after gallery, looking for him, and saw furniture, ornaments, jewellery, lace, and vast gleaming machinery. Miss Groan would have wanted me to stand and watch and listen and learn, but I skipped along with Kitty, scarcely paying attention, stopping willy-nilly and then dashing on again. We were stopped occasionally and told that unattended children weren't permitted in the great exhibition, but we pretended our parents had gone ahead to the next great gallery and scurried off to join them. We saw a vast metal bedstead with curtains of the same crimson velvet as Kitty's acrobatic costume. "It's my bed," said Kitty proudly, "and when all these thousands of people have traipsed back to their own homes, we shall jump on it and close the curtains and sleep in splendour all night long." At last we came across a bizarre collection of stuffed animals, and thought the little frogs very comical, especially the barber frog, supposedly shaving his customer, but there was no sign of an elephant. I began to think I'd imagined one, but then we found ourselves in the gorgeously ornate Indian gallery, and at last there was the elephant. He was enormous, richly clothed in fine embroidered hangings, with a carved gold carriage as big as a hackney cab balanced on his vast grey back. "There's my elephant. Oh, look at him, Kitty. Isn't he splendid? And so lifelike. When we have the Crystal Palace all to ourselves, I'm sure he will come alive, and we will climb right up onto that carriage and sit there like sultans. The elephant will take us for a tour of the exhibition, and then ride us round Hyde Park by the light of the moon. Won't that be marvellous?" I cried. "It will indeed," said Kitty, rubbing her ankle. "But now you've seen, we'd better go to work. Don't you think we'd better have a little rest first? Is your ankle very painful?" I asked. "It aches a little," said Kitty, "but when I do the tumbling, boy, I'm mostly doing handstands and cartwheels, so I won't be standing on it. I should think up another song especially for the exhibition. I wish I could think of a good rhyme for an elephant," I said, as we made our way to one of the exits. We badly needed refreshments, as it was long past dinner time by now. We shared a ham sandwich and a piece of currant lardy cake, and took turns sucking at an orange. Then we had a little rest under the shade of the tree. Kitty slept a little, and I lay on my back, composing. I made up a variation of the national anthem, as everyone seemed in such patriotic mood, blessing Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen, God save the Queen. Make it your mission to see the exhibition, the greatest there's ever been, God save the Queen. Kitty and I could hold hands and sing it together. She was wearing red and I was wearing blue. I picked the daisies in the grass and made 2 white daisy chains. Now we would be dressed in the colours of the Union Jack. I told Kitty my idea when she woke up, and she was impressed. Though, I can still do the tumbling boy, can't I? She asked. Of course, Kitty. That's our best act ever, I said. It seemed a great effort to walk all the way around the enormous palace, so we decided to place ourselves near the exit. There were only a few performers there, though there were many souvenir sellers. I still hankered after a commemorative medal, silver or not, and I wanted to buy a little glass model of the Crystal Palace, and a china figure of the Queen and Prince Albert. But Kitty frowned at me. We're not punters, Lucy, we're performers, she said. She took hold of my hands. Let's start right now. My stomach lurched. I'd got used to singing in front of 10 or 20 people in a park, but we were at the Crystal Palace now, and there were huge crowds milling around everywhere. My throat dried, so I could hardly speak. I don't think I can, I whispered. Swallow. Take a deep breath. We'll start with the tumbling boy. Seeing as we know that best, come on, Kitty implored. So I swallowed. I breathed, and then I opened my mouth and started singing. See the little tumbling boy, I quavered, and Kitty turned herself head over heels and landed lightly on both feet without wincing. We'd begun. No one seemed to notice at first. We just looked like 2 children larking about. So I sang louder, and Kitty shouted, "Hey!" each time she tumbled. The souvenir sellers stared. A large family stopped and smiled. Then another, and suddenly we had a little crowd around us. I sang out and Kitty cartwheeled round and round. When I began the last verse, I cupped my hands hopefully for money, and the crowd responded generously. Kitty stuffed the coins in her pockets, and then we stood together and sang the anthem about going to the exhibition. This went down so well that the crowd grew and started throwing more coins at our feet. As soon as we'd finished the verse, they shouted for us to sing it again, and the third time most of them joined in too. They sang it as they drifted off on their way home, but we attracted fresh people and another shower of coins. Kitty's pockets were now so full that they were weighing her down, and she could barely keep her puffy trousers in place. I'd better look after the money, I said. We don't want your trousers filling around your ankles. I searched for some kind of container in vain while Kitty stood on her hands and waggled her feet in the air. Don't worry, little missy, said the man selling the miniature crystal palaces. You can use one of my empty boxes. I'll look after it for you. My, you 2 tiny kiddies are making a fortune. No wonder. Never seen such a novelty act before. That's so kind of you, sir, I said politely. He chuckled. You got a sweet tongue in that pretty head. Do you like my little palaces? If I've got any left at the end of my stint, I'll give you one for free, he promised. I thought him a lovely man and sang out happily after that, collecting coins after each song and depositing them in his box. They made a satisfying clinking sound as they tumbled into it. Making a fortune you are, he repeated admiringly. We sang on, and Kitty tumbled, and after a long while, we started improvising, doing a little dance between numbers. The crowd clapped and cheered appreciatively. Whatever we did and threw more coins, we really were making a fortune. Oh, Kitty, isn't this amazing, I said. It's marvellous. You've had the best idea ever, said Kitty. You're the cleverest girl in the world. She smiled at me, her eyes sparkling, her cheeks flushed, though she was limping now as she ran about. Perhaps we ought to take a rest now, I said. Not when we've gathered such a good crowd, said Kitty. I can't wait to count up all the coins. Where are you putting all the tin? That kind man's lent me a box. He's keeping an eye on it for us, I said. What man? Said Kitty, suddenly frowning. He's just behind us. He's selling those little crystal palaces, and he says he'll give me one for nothing, I said. I looked around to point him out, but I couldn't see him. He was just there, I said, puzzled. I dodged in and out of the crowd, searching for him, but he was gone, with his tray of little palaces, and our box full of money. And that is where we will leave part 8 of The Runaway Girls by Jacqueline Wilson. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.